Hey guys, welcome back. So, first things first, a very happy new year to all of you. I hope you have a great year ahead. So, let's start. Today, we'll talk about another interesting and basic concept of Java named as constructor chaining. This is a concept that is not usually focused on, but it's very important because that's the core, and understanding the core would help you understand the more advanced concepts. So let's start. What is constructor chaining? First of all, if we go by its name, we are taking multiple constructors and chaining them together, connecting them together. So that's constructor chaining. And how we can achieve it? In Java, there are two ways to achieve constructor chaining. First, via the super keyword, and second via the this keyword. What are the significance of super and this keyword? Basically, super followed by opening and closing parenthesis is used to invoke a constructor of a parent class, and this followed by opening and closing parenthesis is used to invoke a constructor of the same class, that is this class. Okay, so the first point on this concept, constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. So what does it mean? Basically, we just studied that constructor call can be done either via the this keyword or via super keyword. Both of these keywords must be the first one to be invoked inside the constructor. If they're not the first one, then the compiler would throw an error saying that constructor call must be the first one in a constructor. Let's quickly demonstrate this. So we have a parent class here. I'm uncommenting the two constructors of the parent class. The first one is a no-arg constructor and the second one is a parameterized constructor. I'll be invoking the no-arg constructor from the parameterized constructor, and as we see, the compiler doesn't give us any error. It compiles fine and the compiler is happy. Okay, now we'll move this particular statement to the to line number 34, basically after this is out. Let's put it here, and now we can see that compiler is throwing an error. Let's see what the error is. It says constructor call must be the first statement in a constructor. Okay, so now I'm just removing the statement. Now the next point about constructor chaining here is, if this isn't used, super must be invoked. So what does it mean? That if a constructor doesn't call a constructor of the same class, then the super class constructor must be invoked. And and basically this is mandatory. I mean, this is not optional. So why did the Java designers actually thought of this? Because the superclass state must be initialized before its subclass, as the inherited methods in the superclass might depend on it. So the Java designers made it mandatory that whenever we are instantiating a subclass, whenever basically we create an object and instantiate a subclass, then first the superclass must be initialized. So we can ask a question that what if we neither provide a super invocation statement nor a this invocation statement inside a constructor? And as we see in line number 28 to line number 30, the no-arg constructor of the parent class does not invoke a super invocation statement or a this invocation statement, but the compiler is happy, it's not throwing any error. So how does it make sense? Basically, if super or this is not provided inside a constructor, then the compiler inserts a super invocation statement with no args by itself. So here on line number 28 to line number 30, we don't have this or a super invocation statement, so the compiler would internally insert a super invocation statement with no args here, and internally the code would look something like this. Okay, so it's an important point, and let's quickly test this out now. We have a parent class. Firstly, let me remove this super invocation statement from here. We have a parent class and we have a child class that extends the parent class. I am uncommenting this particular line of code. Now basically what I'm doing is I'm creating an object and instantiating it via the child class. Sorry, the class name is wrong here. Okay, now my expectation is that the compiler would have internally inserted a super invocation statement with no args inside the child constructor as well as the parent constructor. So first, when the child constructor is invoked, it would invoke the superclass constructor. It would come onto line number 28. Then the parent class would again invoke the superclass constructor. Here the parent class does not extend any other class, so object class is its parent. If we see the Noah constructor inside the object class, it doesn't do anything, so it would return immediately, and the control would come back onto the parent class constructor. Then it would print parent Noah constructor onto the console, and it would return. So the control would now come onto the child class constructor, and it would print child Noah constructor. So our expectation is that first parent Noah constructor would be printed, then child Noah constructor would be printed. Let's quickly run this and test. As we see, first parent Noah constructor is printed, and then child Noah constructor has been printed onto the console. So this is an important concept, and you should keep this in mind. Now another question that can come onto our mind is that does the compiler insert a super invocation statement at the beginning of all the constructors? So the answer is no. With overloaded constructors, the last invoked constructor will call the super. So if a constructor calls a constructor of the same class via this keyword, then in that constructor the super would not be inserted by the compiler, and the last invoked constructor would finally invoke the super invocation statement. Why is this? Because for every object that's created, we want to instantiate the parent class just once. So if for example we invoke a parameterized constructor of the child class, and inside this we are invoking the Noah constructor of the child class, and the super invocation statement say is inserted onto the beginning of both the constructors, then the parent class would be initialized twice instead of once. That would break the rule. So that's why with overloaded constructors, only the last invoked constructor will call the super invocation statement. So by this we can put on a very concrete statement that a constructor can have either this or super, but not both. So that's a very important statement that you should keep in mind, that a constructor can either have a super invocation statement or a this invocation statement, but not both of them. So now one important interview question that is coming in next. Okay, so the question is that suppose we have a parameterized constructor inside the child class. We do not have this invocation here, and we have a parameterized constructor inside the parent class. And then I'll just comment out this line number 21 and then comment line number 22. So what I'm doing here is that I'm creating a child object and instantiating it via the parameterized constructor of the child class. Now if I comment out the Noah constructor of the parent class, would it make a difference, or the execution would go on smoothly? That's the question for you. I hope you answered it correctly. So just take a moment to think about it and then resume the video further. Okay, so first I'll show you the code in action, and then I'll explain you the reason behind it. I'll just comment out the Noah constructor of the parent class, and we see a compiler error here. Now we'll not see the error right now. Firstly, we'll guess that why is the compiler throwing an error. Basically, as we have already studied, that whenever a constructor does not have a this or super invocation statement, the compiler internally inserts a super invocation statement with no args. So what will the compiler do in this case? It would insert a super invocation statement with no args. Now this super would try to find the Noah constructor of the parent class, and we don't have a Noah constructor in the parent class. That's why the compiler throws an error here, and let us quickly see the error now. Okay, so implicit super invocation parent is undefined, must explicitly invoke another constructor. So we have two options here. Firstly, we can just create a Nova constructor inside the parent class. By this, the error would be gone. But what the compiler is suggesting us is that we can explicitly invoke a superclass constructor inside the child constructor. In that case, we need not explicitly declare a Nova constructor inside the parent class. So I can just invoke a superclass constructor here as per the arguments in the superclass constructor. So inside the parent class, we have a parameterized constructor, so we can just invoke that, and now the compiler is happy. And usually when an interviewer asks this type of question, we just focus on the child class constructor and don't actually look onto the parent class constructor, that do we have a declaration of a Nova constructor inside the parent class or not. So we try to guess the output, but the answer is that it would throw a compiler error in this case. Last but not the least, a bonus point on constructors, that is, it is very obvious, but you should keep in mind that constructors are never inherited. So a parent class constructor is not inherited inside the child class constructor. We can just invoke the parent class constructor from the child class's constructor via the super keyword. Okay, so that was pretty much it about this video. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so I'll meet you in the next one. Till then, bye bye. Have a nice day.